What if Genghis Khan had simply overslept one day? You know, instead of jumping up on his horse and going off to conquer half the world, he would have stretched out, yawned, and said, "Come on, I'd better get some more sleep. The steppe can wait." It's funny to imagine, isn't it? But seriously, what would have happened if the Mongols had not appeared on the historical scene at all? There would have been no Golden Horde, no campaigns that shook Eurasia, and no chaos that turned the fates of entire nations upside down. This thought is so paradoxical that it makes me want to figure out, what would our history look like then? Let's imagine for a moment a world without the Mongol conquerors, without their horse-drawn armies that galloped from China to Hungary, without their fame as the worst nightmare of the 13th century. It's ironic that we often scold the Mongols for their destruction, but have you ever thought that without them, many of the things we're used to might not have existed? For example, the silk trade might have remained a local market, and gunpowder might have been just a Chinese fireworks display. And who knows, maybe some prince in Kievan Rus would never have learned to keep his mouth shut because there would have been no one to re-educate him. This topic is a real intellectual adventure. It makes us think, how could one event, one nation, one historical failure have redrawn the map of the world? And most interestingly, how would it affect us today? Would we still be drinking coffee out of clay cups? Or would Europe have been one big empire and China never invented the compass? We'll try to find out, and believe me, it will be fun. I promise not to burden you with dry facts, but to tell the story as if we were sitting together at a coffee shop table, laughing at the nonsense of the past and wondering how subtly everything in history is connected. So hold on. There will be a story that will be hard to tear yourself away from. Are you ready to dive into an alternative world where the Mongols never became a legend? So, let's imagine that the Mongol hordes never existed. No Genghis Khan, no descendants of his who roamed the steppes and made everyone from Baghdad to Novgorod tremble. What would history look like without this great shakeup? Let's go through the key moments and see what could have changed from politics to culture, from technology to our favorite historical anecdotes. Kievan Rus. Peace or chaos? Let's start with our own lands with Kievan Rus. In real history, the Mongols invaded in the 1230s, burned Kiev, and forced the princes to pay tribute. Without them, Russia could have avoided this blow. But would it have been better off? Let's think about it. In the 12th to 13th centuries, the princes were already fighting among themselves like cats over a bowl of sour cream. Without an external threat that somehow united them, well, at least by fear, the strife could have dragged on for centuries. Imagine, Galicia versus Chernihiv, Novgorod versus Suzdal, and each prince considers himself the navel of the land. The irony is that without the Mongol kick, Russia might not have felt the need for centralization. Instead of the gradual unification of lands around Moscow or another center, we could have had a bunch of small principalities fighting over every garden bed. But there is another side to this. Without the Mongol invasions, cities like Kiev and Vladimir could have preserved their cultural and economic prosperity. Imagine 13th century Kiev not as an ash heap, but as a center of trade, where merchants from Byzantium and the Baltic states argued over the price of furs. Perhaps we would have had more preserved chronicles and churches, and Russian icons would have become a European trend even before the Renaissance. However, without the Mongol yoke, Russia might have remained too fragmented to fight off other neighbors, such as the Lithuanians or Teutons. And who knows, maybe instead of the Golden Horde, we would have had the Grand Duchy of Lithuania up to the Dnipro River even earlier? Europe, without fear, but without progress? Now let's move on to Europe. In real history, the Mongols reached Hungary and Poland, scaring the hell out of everyone. Kings prayed, knights panicked, and chroniclers wrote that the end of the world was near. Without this alarm clock, Europe could have remained in a cozy medieval dream. For strangely enough, the Mongol threat made Europeans move a little. For example, after their defeat in 1241, the Hungarians began to build stone castles instead of wooden sheds. Without the Mongols, perhaps European fortifications would have developed more slowly, and knights would have been riding around in their shiny armor for a long time without thinking about guns. But there is another twist. The Mongols actually facilitated trade along the Great Silk Road by ensuring the safety of caravans. Without their iron hand, trade between East and West could have remained chaotic. Imagine, no flow of spices, silk, or new ideas. Italian merchants like Marco Polo might never have reached China, and gunpowder would have reached Europe not in the 13th, but in the 15th century. Ironically, without the Mongol mediation, Europeans could have stayed in the dark longer, literally and figuratively. The Renaissance? Maybe it would have been 100 years late, and we would still believe that the earth is a flat plate. China, an empire without upheaval. But what about China? In real history, the Mongols conquered the Song dynasty and founded the Yuan dynasty. Without them, the Song could have ruled for another century. But would that have been a good thing? The Song were famous for their science and culture, but their army was, to put it mildly, not very good. Without the Mongol invasion, China could have remained isolated, not feeling the need to open up to the world. The compass, gunpowder, and printing might have developed more slowly because there would have been no Mongol rulers to export these ideas across their vast territories. On the other hand, without the Mongol wars, China could have avoided huge losses of population and resources. Imagine the Song dynasty prospering peacefully, building a navy, and possibly discovering America before Columbus. It's funny to imagine Chinese junks landing in Mexico and Aztecs trying dumplings instead of tacos. But without the Mongolian push, China could have been mired in bureaucracy, and its technology would have remained a local exotic. The Islamic world, no destruction, but no unity. In real history, the Mongols destroyed Baghdad in 1258, putting an end to the Abbasid Caliphate. Without them, the Islamic world could have preserved its golden age longer. Baghdad would have remained a center of science, where mathematicians and astronomers would have argued over a glass of grape juice. But there is a caveat. Without the Mongol blow, the caliphate could have become too overconfident, not feeling the need to reform. The Ottoman Empire, which partially grew out of the ashes of the Mongol Wars, might not have emerged, and instead we would have had a bunch of small emirates quarreling over deserts. The irony is that the Mongols, while destroying, also united. Their empire became a bridge between cultures through which ideas flowed like water. Without them, the world could have remained divided, and instead of global exchange, we would have had only local bazaars. Imagine, no tea in England, no coffee in Turkey, and in Italy they still eat porridge instead of pasta. Modernity. What would we lose or gain? Now let's look into the present of this alternative world. Without the Mongol upheaval, history might have moved more slowly. Europe might not have been in a hurry to make the great discoveries because there would have been no need to look for new routes to India. The Americas might have remained unknown until the 17th century, and imagine the Aztecs and Incas building their empires without the Spanish conquistadors. But without the Mongol influence on trade and technology, we might not have many of the things we're used to, from paper money, thanks to China via the Mongols, to cannons that changed warfare. What would our culture have looked like? Without the Mongol invasions, Russia could have preserved more Slavic traditions, but would we have benefited from that? Maybe instead of the tale of Igor's campaign, we would have had a dozen other epics, but we would not have known the 1001 Nights because Arabic tales would not have reached Europe. And the funniest thing is that without the Mongol push, we might not have had modern pizza because Italians would not have been in a hurry to experiment with tomatoes that came through global trade. So we have reached the end of our journey through the world, where the Mongols never became a threat to Eurasia. What do we have? Kievan Rus, which might have flourished as a cultural center, but would have been mired in princely quarrels. Europe, which would have slept in its medieval palaces, not rushing to invent cannons or discover new continents. China, which could have become a technological mecca, but never shared its compass with the world. And Baghdad, which would have remained the library of the world, but perhaps would not have given birth to new empires. The world without the Mongols would be quieter, but would it be better? It is ironic that we often curse conquerors for chaos, but it is this chaos that sometimes pushes history forward. Without Mongolian hooves trampling the steppes, we might have lived in a different world. Maybe without coffee in the morning or pizza for dinner, without fast ships or even the idea that the earth is round. Or maybe on the contrary, we would have invented something cooler because some prince in Novgorod would have invented the steam engine 100 years earlier? Who knows? But one thing is for sure. History is a shaky structure where a single stone can change everything. This journey makes us think about how fragile our world is. We complain about traffic jams or the weather, but what if we lived in a world where there were no cars or forecasts because no one invented either. It's ridiculous to imagine how we would complain about the delay of a stagecoach or the fact that the neighborhood minstrel is singing out of tune again. But it reminds us that every event, even a terrible one, can lead to something new. And this is worth appreciating. If you enjoyed thinking about these what-ifs, please like this post. It's a signal that we're on the right track. Subscribe because there are many more stories ahead where we will turn the past upside down. Let's figure out together how history would have turned out and laugh at how ridiculous it might have looked. See you soon, friends, and don't sleep on your Mongol invasion. Who knows where it will lead you?